For your ears only, for the week of September 21st, 2014, I'm David Alpern with a quote from last week's news. We were all out of touch, and now we're paying for it. That was a former British government official on the surprising strength of nationalist sentiment in Scotland, though a referendum on resigning from the United Kingdom was rejected by a wider margin than polls predicted, 54 to 46%, based in part on London's promise of more regional authority. Spain's government threatened to block an independence vote in the Catalan region. Now, this insider view of the Nixon resignation 40 years ago from our June 6, 2005 Newsweek On Air show after FBI official Mark Felt was revealed as the Watergate source called Deep Throat, co-hosted by Ginger Otis and Warren Levinson of Associated Press.
You can't have the guy that's running it going around giving out secret information. It's one thing for somebody in government to leak things, that's fine, but not the deputy director of the FBI.
This was always Nixon's worst fear, that the FBI didn't like him and they would go out to nail him. And this was one of the reasons he was motivated to cover up. Well, he might have been right.
There's nothing heroic about breaking faith with your people, breaking the law, sneaking around in garages.
Like many former Nixon aides, Charles Colson, John Dean, and Pat Buchanan had harsh views of Mark Felt. As Deep Throat, he brought their leader to shame and resignation, and in the case of some, like Colson and Dean, there were prison sentences in a painful resolution of Watergate. But try as they might to shift the blame for the nation's premier political scandal to its best-known anonymous source, the facts that some of us remember covering are hard to dispute. A paranoid president and a White House steeped in secret tactics and such a powerful presumption it was above the law or capable of corrupting it that it taped itself in the process.
Reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein were not always as close as they were during the Watergate days of the early 1970s or as they are today. But Newsweek On Air brought them together in 1989 to discuss the legacy of Watergate and the impact of a new TV version of their second book about it, The Final Days. And on the 20th anniversary of the break-in, we got the perspective of the late Katharine Graham, legendary boss lady of the Washington Post company, which also owns Newsweek.
We started by asking Woodward his reaction to the TV reenactment.
Happily, in making the movie, they stuck to the facts, and the facts establish the crimes, and the crimes are dealt with, particularly through the tapes, which kind of become a Greek chorus in the movie, and you see what he said and you see what he did, and I think it makes it vividly clear that he resigned because he realized he was guilty.
Let's turn to Carl Bernstein for a second. Have your own views of the Watergate crimes changed as we've all gone through Koreagate and WedTechGate and Irangate and the rest? If all of what happened to Nixon, if all of these later scandals had happened first, do you think Nixon would have had to pay the price he did for Watergate?
I think what Richard Nixon did was unprecedented, and it was extraordinary, and you have to keep in mind that what he did was totally go against the oath of office he had taken to uphold the Constitution. And that we'd never had anything like that happen in our history before. And I think that this TV movie makes it clear the enormity of what he did in this regard. At the same time, and I think that indeed that would it happen again today, that probably the same result would happen, that he would have to leave office. That what the movie does, as the book does, is that it shows an empathic view of the man's human situation. Here's the first man in our history trapped by his own acts and reacting to being closed in on. And it's at moments it's very sad and compelling, just as it was in the book that we wrote.
Woodward and Bernstein on this show on October 22, 1989. In June of 1992, to mark the 20th anniversary of Watergate, co-host Warren Levinson and I spoke with the legendary Washington Post head lady Katharine Graham about trusting her reporters and their anonymous source through the crunch, and about the scandal's legacy on journalism.
In general, when you have a story that is very exciting, it's exclusive for about 5 minutes, and then everybody piles on and it's not exclusive anymore. And with Watergate, it was exclusive for June to more or less the end of the summer. I don't mean totally exclusive either, because thank heaven there were a few other publications, the Los Angeles Times and Time, and I can't remember, but there were moments when people came in, which were of great comfort. And finally in October, Walter Cronkite did 2 10-minute pieces on the air, and that was a great help because it took us national. So what made the pressure of being alone on it great was that you thought, if this is such a wonderful story, where is everybody else?
Carl Bernstein has talked about being concerned about his personal safety at one point, and I gather you were warned by some friends not to be alone, physically, literally. Can you recall those feelings?
Yeah, I didn't take that too seriously, to be honest. What I did take seriously was the threats made against the company. And those were threats against our television station licenses that made our stock plummet. And then there were other threats. They cut off access to everybody in the White House. They wouldn't answer our phones. They wouldn't let anybody come over here to editorial lunches. They wouldn't let anybody come to my house to dinner, which was not exactly the worst threat in the world. But it was sort of total.
You've said any number of times that it wasn't the Washington Post and it wasn't journalism that brought Richard Nixon down. What was the role of the press, do you think?
Well, I think it was its proper role. The role of the press was to keep the story alive when they were trying to hush it up. The thing that brought the president down was proper constitutional procedures, which was the courts and the grand juries and finally the committees of Congress.
10 years ago, a Newsweek poll found the majority of Americans thinking that Watergate could happen again, and some people today believe it has, perhaps even worse, in the Iran-Contra case. How do you see that?
Well, I don't see Iran-Contra as quite in the league with Watergate, because I really think that what was at stake in Watergate was an attempt to pervert the democratic system. I think that, in a sense, Iran-Contra was very serious because it was going around the mandate of Congress. And it was bad, but I don't think it was a perversion of the total system or an attempt to, which is what happened at the time of Watergate.
What do you think is the long-term enduring legacy of Watergate for the press?
I think that it is the role of investigative reporting clearly became more important, but I think that it was overdone for a while. I mean, I think everybody in the world, all the young people in the world, went to journalism school and wanted to investigate everything, and I think they overdid it. I think you have to investigate things. You have to be skeptical, but you shouldn't be vengeful, and you have to be fair, and you have to be careful.
The late Katharine Graham on Watergate's 20th anniversary from our June 14th, 1992 broadcast, and before that, reporters Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein.
From our June 6, 2005 Newsweek On Air program. Now, this quote from last week's news: there's plenty of great reporting going on. The question is it going to be supported by readers and viewers? That was Carl Bernstein at a joint appearance with Woodward in Ohio, decrying the loss of interest in serious news and meaningful reaction to it. Woodward earlier faulted President Obama for alienating too many Democrats in the House and Senate by not listening to them. Indeed, Obama last week lost a significant number of Democratic votes for what many felt was an ill-conceived plan to fight the brutal Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, though he also picked up unaccustomed support from some predictably hawkish Republicans. Next, Le Carré on Le Cold War, and challenges left by its ending, for your ears only.